The morning sun cast long shadows across downtown Atlanta. As Detective Marcus Williams finished his third cup of coffee, reviewing case files at his desk, the precinct buzzed with its usual rhythm of ringing phones and shuffling paperwork. But something felt different today. Emergency calls had been flooding in since dawn. Reports of people acting erratically, biting others, and displaying impossible aggression. Marcus rubbed his tired eyes, attributing the search to another drug epidemic hitting the streets. Across town, Dr. Emily Rodriguez was experiencing her own crisis at Mercy General Hospital. The emergency room had been overrun since midnight with patients exhibiting bizarre symptoms, high fever, dilated pupils, and an insatiable hunger that drove them to attack anyone within reach. Security guards struggled to contain increasingly violent individuals who seemed impervious to pain and showed no response to sedatives. Emily had never witnessed anything like it in her 15 years of medical practice. The first real sign of catastrophe came when Officer Jake Thompson's radio crackled to life. During his patrol of the warehouse district, "All units, we have a situation at Riverside Elementary, multiple casualties, suspect is Jesus Christ." "What is that thing?" The transmission cut to static, leaving Jake racing toward the school with his heart pounding against his ribs. What Jake discovered would haunt him forever. The kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Patterson, stood in the playground covered in blood, her skin a sickly gray color and her eyes completely white. She moved with jerky, unnatural motions, and when she turned toward Jake, her mouth hung open, revealing missing chunks of tongue and throat. Behind her, small figures stumbled around the playground. Children who should have been laughing and playing, now moving with the same horrifying gait. Meanwhile, at the city's research facility, Dr. Benjamin Carter was frantically trying to reach his superiors. As the lead virologist for the CDC's Atlanta branch, he had been monitoring unusual reports from rural areas for weeks. Strange deaths, missing persons, and wildlife behaving aggressively had painted a pattern he desperately hoped he was wrong about. His worst fears were confirmed when security footage from a rural clinic showed the impossible. Dead patients rising from morgue tables and attacking the living. The chaos escalated rapidly as emergency services became overwhelmed. Fire Chief Robert Hayes found his crews responding to calls where the victims weren't just injured, but turned into attackers themselves. His firefighters reported being chased by people who should have been dead from smoke inhalation, their burns covering most of their bodies yet still moving with deadly purpose. At Channel 7 News, reporter Jessica Martinez was trying to make sense of conflicting reports flooding in from across the city. Hospitals reporting patients attacking staff, schools under lockdown, and entire neighborhoods going dark on communication networks. Her camera crew had captured footage of what appeared to be riots, but the participants moved strangely, and the violence was unlike anything they had documented before. The breaking point came when the mayor's emergency meeting was interrupted by screams from the street below. Through the city hall windows, they watched as crowds of gray-skinned figures poured into the square, overwhelming the police barriers that had been hastily erected. These weren't protesters or rioters, they were something far worse. As the sun began to set on what would be remembered as the last normal day, groups of survivors started forming organically. Marcus found himself barricaded in the precinct with a handful of officers and civilians, while Emily worked desperately to treat bite victims who kept turning into the very monsters they were fighting. Jake had managed to evacuate some children from the elementary school and was now protecting them in an abandoned warehouse. The city's communication systems began failing, as cell towers were either damaged or abandoned by fleeing technicians. Radio transmissions became increasingly desperate, with pleas for military assistance and evacuation orders that no one seemed equipped to carry out. The National Guard had been deployed, but early reports suggested they were facing something their training had never prepared them for. Dr. Carter's final transmission to the CDC headquarters painted the grim reality. The infection spreads through bites. The incubation period is roughly 6 to 8 hours, and death is followed by reanimation within minutes. Traditional crowd control methods are ineffective. Military intervention required immediately. This is not a drill. We are facing a complete breakdown of civilization. As darkness fell over Atlanta, the scattered groups of survivors faced their first night in a world that had fundamentally changed. The dead walked among them, driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh, and the thin veneer of modern society had been stripped away in less than 12 hours. The fight for survival broke over a city transformed into humanity's greatest test lay ahead in the days to come. Once a symbol of progress and prosperity, and nothing would ever be shrouded in smoke from dozens of fires burning unchecked throughout the metropolitan area. The zombie infection had spread like wildfire during the night, turning the population into shambling horrors that roamed the streets in ever-growing numbers. Detective Marcus Williams peered through the reinforced windows of the precinct, counting at least 40 zombies wandering aimlessly in the parking lot below. His makeshift group of survivors had grown overnight as desperate people sought refuge. Among them were Officer Rebecca Thompson, Jake's younger sister, who had arrived at dawn with terrifying stories of her apartment complex being overrun, elderly, Mr. Patterson, who had escaped from a nursing home before it fell, and teenage siblings Tyler and Madison Brooks, whose parents had been infected. While trying to reach them, the precinct's radio equipment still functioned, picking up fragmented transmissions from other survivor groups across the city. Marcus coordinated with Captain David Morrison, who was leading a group of firefighters and civilians from Station 19, and received sporadic upgrades from Emily's medical team holed up at Mercy General Hospital. The picture they painted was grim. Entire neighborhoods had gone silent. Major highways were clogged with abandoned vehicles, and the zombie population was growing exponentially. At the hospital, Dr. Emily Rodriguez worked tirelessly to treat victims while grappling with an impossible medical crisis. Her team had discovered that traditional antibiotics and antivirals had no effect on the infection. Nurse Patricia Williams, no relation to Marcus, had become her closest ally, helping to maintain order among the terrified patients and staff. Security guard Antonio Rivera coordinated the hospital's defenses, using furniture and medical equipment to barricade entrances, while his team rationed their limited ammunition. The most disturbing discovery came when Emily realized that the infection wasn't just spreading through bites. Scratches from zombie fingernails also transmitted the virus, and even exposure to infected blood through open wounds proved dangerous. She documented everything meticulously, knowing this information could be crucial for other survivors. While Nurse Kevin Chang worked to establish communication with other medical facilities that might still be operational. Military intervention had begun, but the results were far from encouraging. Colonel Sandra Hayes commanded the National Guard unit attempting to establish a safe zone at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, but her soldiers quickly learned that headshots were the only reliable way to stop the zombies. Conventional crowd control tactics failed miserably when facing enemies that felt no pain and couldn't be intimidated or reasoned with. Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, Emily's cousin, radioed disturbing reports from his patrol unit. Zombies retained enough motor function to climb stairs, open simple doors, and even use basic tools. More terrifyingly, they seemed to be drawn to noise and movement, meaning large groups of survivors inevitably attracted massive hordes. His squad had witnessed a shopping center being overrun when too many survivors gathered there, the noise of their presence drawing zombies from miles around. Meanwhile, Dr. Benjamin Carter had barricaded himself in his laboratory with research assistant Lisa Thompson and janitor Carlos Martinez working around the clock. Carter analyzed blood samples from infected subjects and made a chilling discovery. The virus rewrote brain chemistry completely, shutting down higher cognitive functions, while enhancing basic motor skills and creating an overwhelming drive to feed on living tissue. Most disturbing was evidence that the infection might be airborne in its initial stages, though this required confirmation. Communications specialist Jennifer Davis managed to establish contact between the various survivor groups using ham radio equipment salvaged from the city's emergency services. Her technical expertise became invaluable as cell towers failed and internet infrastructure collapsed. Through her coordination efforts, the groups began sharing crucial information about zombie behavior patterns, safe routes through the city, and locations of supplies. The day's most significant development came when Jake Thompson's group at the elementary school made contact with Marcus. Jake had successfully evacuated 12 children and the teachers, but they were running low on food and medical supplies. His report of zombie behavior was particularly valuable. The creatures were more active during daylight hours and seemed to lose coordination in complete darkness, though they remained extremely dangerous. As evening approached, the reality of their situation became clear to all the survivor groups. The infection had spread beyond any hope of containment. Government response was inadequate, and they were essentially on their own in a world where the dead hunted the living. Supply shortages were becoming critical, ammunition was limited, and every noise they made attracted more zombies to their locations. Marcus made the decision that would define their survival. The scattered groups needed to unite if they had any hope of lasting more than a few days. Using Jennifer's communication network, he proposed a dangerous plan to merge all survivor groups at a single, more defensible location. The risks were enormous, but isolation meant certain death as resources depleted and zombie numbers continued to grow. The gathering storm was about to become a hurricane, and their only chance was to weather it together. The abandoned Northgate shopping mall stood like a fortress in the heart of Atlanta's suburban sprawl, its massive parking lot littered with abandoned vehicles and debris from the initial panic. Detective Marcus Williams surveyed the building through binoculars from the roof of a nearby office complex, noting its strategic advantages: multiple entrances that could be sealed, a food court with commercial kitchens, and most importantly, a second-floor layout that would make it easier to defend against the shambling hordes below. The decision to merge all survivor groups had been unanimous. After a night of increasingly desperate radio calls, Dr. Emily Rodriguez's hospital group had been forced to evacuate when zombies breached their makeshift barricades, and Jake Thompson's elementary school refuge had become untenable. When a horde of over 100 zombies surrounded the building, the mall represented their best hope. For a long-term defensive position, the convergence began at dawn. Marcus led the first group through a carefully planned route, using police vehicles to create noise distractions that drew zombies away from their intended paths. Officer Rebecca Thompson proved invaluable during the journey, her knowledge of the city's back roads helping them avoid the major arteries, where abandoned cars had created impassable barriers. Filled with wandering undead, Emily's medical team arrived 2 hours later, their ambulances loaded with precious medical supplies and equipment salvaged from the hospital. The harrowing journey had cost them 3 people, including Dr. Robert Chen, who had volunteered to stay behind and seal the hospital's pharmacy to prevent zombies from accessing dangerous medications. Nurse Patricia Williams carried the weight of that loss heavily, but her professional composure helped maintain morale among the other survivors. Jake's group faced the most dangerous extraction, surrounded at the elementary school. They required a coordinated rescue operation that demonstrated the power of their newly formed alliance. Captain David Morrison's firefighters created a diversion using their truck sirens and air horns, while Marcus's police team established an escape corridor. The operation succeeded, but not without casualties. Teacher Mrs. Linda Foster was bitten during the evacuation and made the agonizing decision to stay behind rather than risk infecting the children. She had protected Dot inside the mall. Dr. Benjamin Carter immediately established a research station in the former electronics store, using equipment salvaged from his laboratory and the hospital. His preliminary findings painted an increasingly disturbing picture of the infection. Research assistant Lisa Thompson helped him document that the virus showed signs of mutation, with newer zombies displaying slightly improved coordination and problem-solving abilities. More alarmingly, they discovered that the infection timeline was accelerating, by victims returning in for hours instead of the original 6 to 8. The mall's security became everyone's priority. Antonio Rivera, the former hospital security guard, took charge of fortifying entrances with the help of maintenance worker Carlos Martinez and communications specialist Jennifer Davis. They welded shut most of the mall's numerous entrances, leaving only 3 heavily fortified access points that could be monitored and defended. The survivors worked in shifts, using tools from the hardware store to create barrier systems and weapon caches throughout the building. Food rationing emerged as the first major internal conflict. The mall's food court and grocery store provided substantial supplies, but feeding 4 to 7 survivors indefinitely required careful management. Teenage siblings Tyler and Madison Brooks, who had lost their parents during the hospital evacuation, argued that children should receive larger portions, while elderly survivors like Mr. Patterson worried about medical conditions requiring special diets. Emily found herself mediating these disputes while also treating the wounded and monitoring potential infections. The most challenging decision came when survivor Michael Santos arrived at the mall showing signs of fever and disorientation. He claimed to have been scratched by a zombie 2 days earlier, but insisted he felt fine. Dr. Carter's examination revealed early symptoms of infection, creating a moral dilemma that threatened to tear apart their fragile community. Some survivors, led by office worker Jana Reynolds, demanded Santos be expelled immediately. Others, including Emily and Marcus, argued for quarantine and observation. The debate revealed fundamental philosophical differences about survival versus humanity. Sergeant Michael Rodriguez advocated for military-style discipline and harsh but practical decisions, while teacher Amanda Foster, Linda's sister, who had joined them during the mall consolidation, insisted they maintain their moral principles even in desperate circumstances. The tension escalated when Santos collapsed during the argument, his condition deteriorating rapidly. Emily made the executive decision to quarantine Santos in the mall's former jewelry store, with volunteers taking shifts to monitor his condition and provide comfort during his final hours. The incident established crucial protocols for future infections, while demonstrating the group's commitment to maintaining their humanity, despite the circumstances. As night fell on their first day in the mall, the survivors faced a sobering reality. They had successfully created a defensible position and established a functioning community, but the challenges ahead were immense. Zombie hordes were gathering outside. Attracted by the activity and noise of their consolidation, resources would eventually run out, and internal conflicts threatened their unity. Most concerning of all, Dr. Carter's research suggested the zombie threat was evolving, becoming more dangerous with each passing day. Their unlikely alliance had been forged in desperation, but whether it could withstand the pressures of prolonged siege remained to be seen. The third morning at Northgate Mall brought with it a sight that chilled every survivor to their core. What had started as scattered groups of zombies wandering the parking lot had transformed overnight into a sea of undead flesh stretching as far as the eye could see. Detective Marcus Williams counted at least 3,000 zombies pressed against the mall's exterior walls, their collective moaning creating a constant, soul-crushing drone that penetrated even the building's reinforced structure. Dr. Benjamin Carter's worst fears were being confirmed through his research. The zombies weren't just mindlessly wandering anymore. They were exhibiting pack behavior. Groups of 20 to 30 zombies moved in coordinated patterns, and when one detected prey, the entire horde responded with frightening efficiency. More disturbing still, they had begun to learn. Carter observed through security cameras as zombies attempted to stack debris against walls, seemingly trying to reach second-floor windows. The siege had begun when teenager Madison Brooks accidentally triggered a car alarm while scavenging supplies from the parking lot. The sound had drawn zombies from across the city, and within hours, their sanctuary had become a trap. Communications specialist Jennifer Davis monitored radio frequencies desperately, but the news from other survivor groups was uniformly grim. Every major stronghold in Atlanta was reporting similar sieges, with many going silent after their final transmissions. Inside the mall, the psychological pressure was becoming unbearable. Elderly survivor Mr. Patterson suffered a mild heart attack from the stress, requiring Dr. Emily Rodriguez to perform emergency treatment with limited medical supplies. The constant noise from outside made sleep nearly impossible, and several survivors, including office worker Jonna Reynolds, were showing signs of severe anxiety and paranoia. Arguments broke out over trivial matters as the community's carefully maintained civility began to crack. The first major test of their defenses came when zombies discovered the loading dock entrance that the survivors had believed was secure. Maintenance worker Carlos Martinez noticed the breach just as a dozen zombies poured through a gap in their barricade. The subsequent battle was brutal and chaotic, with survivors using everything from kitchen knives to fire axes to repel the invasion. Security guard Antonio Rivera was badly injured during the fighting, suffering deep scratches that required immediate medical attention and raised fears about infection. Captain David Morrison organized the survivors into defensive teams, assigning shifts for guard duty and establishing protocols for different types of breaches. His firefighting experience proved invaluable in creating evacuation routes and safety procedures. But the relentless pressure was taking its toll on everyone, even the children. Despite teacher Amanda Foster's efforts to maintain some normalcy through makeshift classes and activities, were showing signs of trauma and despair. The most harrowing incident occurred when 12-year-old Tyler Brooks became separated from the group during a supply run to the mall's pharmacy. Officer Rebecca Thompson led a desperate search through the mall's maze of corridors, while zombies pounded against the barricades just meters away. They found Tyler hiding in a maintenance closet, paralyzed with fear after witnessing a zombie break through a supposedly secure barrier. The incident highlighted how quickly their situation could deteriorate and how vulnerable they all remained. Food rationing became increasingly strict, as Dr. Emily realized their supplies wouldn't last more than 2 weeks with the current population. The mall's grocery store had been well stocked initially, but feeding 4 to 7 people required careful calculation of every meal. Nurse Patricia Williams took charge of the food distribution, implementing a system that prioritized pregnant women, children, and those performing essential duties like guard shifts and medical care. Research assistant Lisa Thompson made a crucial discovery while helping Dr. Carter analyze zombie behavior patterns. The creatures were most active during daylight hours and showed decreased coordination in complete darkness, but they never actually slept or rested. This meant the siege would continue indefinitely unless the survivors could find a way to break free or eliminate the threat entirely. More concerning was evidence that the zombies were communicating through some form of primitive social structure, with larger specimens seeming to direct the movements of smaller groups. Sergeant Michael Rodriguez attempted to establish contact with military forces, but the responses he received were increasingly desperate. Colonel Sandra Hayes reported that evacuation zones were being overrun faster than they could be established, and military casualties were mounting rapidly. The National Guard units that remained operational were falling back to more defensible positions, essentially abandoning civilian rescue operations in favor of protecting military installations and government facilities. As the 4th day dawned, with no decrease in the zombie population surrounding them, the survivors faced a terrible realization. Their stronghold had become their prison, and the undead horde showed no signs of losing interest or moving on. Ammunition was running dangerously low, medical supplies were nearly exhausted, and the psychological strain was pushing several community members toward complete breakdown. Marcus called an emergency meeting of the leadership group, knowing they needed to develop an escape plan before their situation became completely hopeless. The siege had only just begun, but already it was clear that staying in the mall meant certain death. The question was whether leaving meant dying faster or finding salvation. The 7th day at Northgate Mall marked a devastating turning point that would test every survivor's moral foundation. The zombie horde outside had swelled to an estimated 5,000 undead, their relentless assault on the building's structure creating visible damage to walls and barricades. More critically, the mall's food supplies had dwindled to less than 3 days' worth of rations, forcing Detective Marcus Williams to confront the unthinkable reality that not everyone might survive much longer. The crisis reached its peak when office worker Jana Reynolds gathered a faction of survivors in the mall's former bookstore for what she called a survival meeting. Her group included accountant Robert Mitchell, store manager Sandra Lopez, and surprisingly, Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, whose military pragmatism had gradually shifted toward harsh realism. Reynolds argued passionately that the group's resources should be redistributed to prioritize the strongest and most useful members of their community. "We're carrying dead weight," Reynolds declared, her voice carrying across the tense gathering. "The elderly, the injured, the children who consume resources without contributing to our defense, they're condemning us all to death." Her words struck like lightning through the community, with elderly Mr. Patterson visibly recoiling and teacher Amanda Foster instinctively moving to shield the Brooks siblings from the cruel assessment. The confrontation that followed revealed the deep fractures that had been developing within their survivor community. Reynolds' faction argued that 12-year-old Tyler Brooks, who had been struggling with severe anxiety since his separation incident, and his sister Madison were consuming precious food while contributing nothing to their survival efforts. They also targeted injured security guard Antonio Rivera, whose scratched arm had become infected, though not with the zombie virus, and required ongoing medical attention. Dr. Emily Rodriguez found herself at the center of the moral battlefield. Her medical oath demanded she protect all patients regardless of their perceived value to the group. "The moment we start deciding who deserves to live based on their usefulness," she argued with fierce determination, "we become no better than the monsters outside these walls." Her words resonated with many survivors, but the harsh mathematics of survival couldn't be ignored. The debate grew heated when communications specialist Jennifer Davis revealed she had been monitoring military frequencies and discovered that evacuation zones were implementing similar triage protocols, essentially abandoning those deemed unlikely to contribute to long-term survival efforts. This information provided uncomfortable validation for Reynolds' position while horrifying those who still believed in maintaining their humanity. Meanwhile, Dr. Benjamin Carter was making breakthrough discoveries in his makeshift laboratory that would change everything, working with research assistant Lisa Thompson. He had been analyzing blood samples from various zombie encounters and noticed consistent patterns. In the virus's genetic structure, the infection appeared to be synthetic rather than naturally occurring, suggesting it had been engineered as some form of biological weapon that had escaped containment. More importantly, Carter discovered that certain individuals showed natural resistance to the virus. Nurse Patricia Williams had been exposed to infected blood multiple times during medical procedures, but showed no signs of infection. Similarly, maintenance worker Carlos Martinez had survived a zombie bite on his forearm 3 days earlier, with the wound healing normally instead of spreading the deadly pathogen. The implications were staggering. If some people possess natural immunity, it might be possible to develop a treatment or even a cure. However, Carter's research required more time, resources, and test subjects, luxuries they didn't have while trapped in their deteriorating stronghold. The discovery added another layer of complexity to the group's survival calculations and moral debates. The breaking point came when the mall's main water system failed. Zombies had damaged the external pipes during their relentless assault, leaving the survivors dependent on bottled water that would last perhaps 2 days. Faced with imminent dehydration, Reynolds' faction issued an ultimatum: redistribute all remaining resources among the essential personnel, or watch everyone die together. Jake Thompson, who had remained relatively neutral during previous conflicts, finally chose sides when Reynolds suggested that children should be mercifully eliminated to preserve resources for adults. His police training and protective instincts exploded into action as he physically confronted Reynolds, declaring that anyone who threatened the children would have to go through him first. The confrontation escalated when Rodriguez drew his sidearm, claiming military authority over the civilian population. The standoff lasted for tense minutes before Marcus Williams intervened, using his natural leadership abilities and detective skills to propose an alternative solution. Instead of abandoning their most vulnerable members, he suggested they attempt the dangerous escape plan they had been developing, a coordinated breakout that would either lead them all to safety or result in their deaths together. Emily's medical expertise proved crucial in this moment as she revealed Carter's immunity discoveries to the entire group. The possibility that some survivors might hold the key to humanity's salvation reframed their moral debate entirely. Suddenly, every life had potential value beyond immediate survival contributions, and the harsh calculations of Reynolds' faction seemed not just cruel, but strategically foolish. As night fell on their 7th day in the mall, the survivors faced their most difficult decision yet. They could continue their moral civil war while resources depleted, or unite behind one final desperate gambit for freedom. The breaking point had arrived, and their choices in the next few hours would determine not just their survival, but whether they remained human beings worth saving. The escape plan began at 3:47 a.m. on their 8th day in the mall, under cover of darkness when the zombies showed their lowest coordination levels. Detective Marcus Williams had spent hours studying building blueprints and zombie movement patterns to devise their desperate gambit, a coordinated 3-pronged breakout that would divide the massive horde while giving different groups the best chance of reaching the rumored military safe zone at Fort McPherson, 15 miles south of the city. The first team, led by Captain David Morrison, would create a massive diversion at the mall's main entrance. Using the remaining vehicles in the parking lot, fire trucks, police cars, and civilian vehicles would be started simultaneously, their horns and sirens drawing the bulk of the zombie horde toward the front of the building. Morrison's team included maintenance worker Carlos Martinez, office worker Jeanna Reynolds despite her recent moral conflicts, and communications specialist Jennifer Davis, whose technical skills were essential for coordinating the operation via radio. The second team, commanded by Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, would execute a stealth extraction through the loading dock with the most vulnerable survivors, the children, elderly, and injured. This group included the Brooks siblings Tyler and Madison, elderly Mr. Patterson, injured security guard Antonio Rivera, and teacher Amanda Foster. Rodriguez had argued against including the non-essential personnel, but Marcus's leadership had prevailed. They would save everyone or die trying. The third and most dangerous team consisted of the medical and scientific personnel, who carried humanity's potential salvation. Dr. Emily Rodriguez led this group with Dr. Benjamin Carter, research assistant Lisa Thompson, and nurse Patricia Williams. Their mission was to reach Fort McPherson with Carter's research data and blood samples from the naturally immune survivors. If the cure existed, This team represented humanity's best hope of finding it. The operation began with Morrison's diversion, team making their way to the vehicles through carefully cut holes in the barricades. The sound of engines starting sent ripples of movement through the zombie horde, thousands of undead creatures turning toward the noise with their characteristic jerky movements. Horns blared and sirens wailed as the vehicles began their deadly parade around the parking lot, drawing zombies away from the other exit points. Rodriguez's stealth team encountered their first crisis when 12-year-old Tyler Brooks froze in terror at the sight of zombies just meters away. The boy's panic threatened to compromise the entire operation, until his sister Madison grabbed his hand and whispered the same words their mother had used during thunderstorms. "We're braver than we think and stronger than we know." The simple phrase broke through Tyler's paralysis, allowing the group to continue their careful movement toward their designated escape vehicle. Emily's medical team faced a different challenge when they discovered that Dr. Carter had been concealing the progression of an infection from a zombie scratch he received days earlier. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, but his brilliant mind remained clear enough to continue his research. Lisa Thompson made the heart-wrenching decision to carry Carter's research notes and blood samples, knowing she might have to continue his work if he didn't survive the journey. The plan began to unravel when the zombie horde proved more intelligent than anticipated. Instead of being completely drawn to the diversion, roughly a third of the undead remained near the mall's other entrances, as if some primitive tactical instinct warned them against being completely deceived. Rodriguez's stealth team found themselves facing hundreds of zombies instead of the dozen they had expected to encounter. The situation deteriorated further when Morrison's diversion team discovered that many of the vehicles had been damaged by zombie attacks over the previous days. The fire trucks wouldn't start, and several police cars had been rendered inoperable. The diversion was only partially effective, leaving all three teams facing far more dangerous conditions than planned. Communication between teams became critical as Jennifer Davis coordinated their movements via handheld radios. Her calm voice guided the groups through the chaos, but the constant updates painted an increasingly desperate picture. Rodriguez's team was pinned down in the loading dock area. Morrison's diversion was losing effectiveness as vehicles ran out of fuel, and Emily's medical team was moving through zombie-infested corridors toward an uncertain exit. The first casualty came when Accountant Robert Mitchell, part of Morrison's diversion team, was overwhelmed by zombies while trying to restart a stalled police car. His sacrifice bought precious time for the others, but his loss devastated team morale. The operation was becoming exactly what Marcus had feared, a desperate gambit with no guarantee of success. As dawn approached, the three teams faced impossible odds in their fight for freedom. The zombie horde remained massive despite their diversion tactics. The city streets beyond the mall promised even greater dangers, and their destination was still 15 miles away, through territory completely overrun by the undead. The mall that had been their prison was about to become their graveyard, unless they could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. The desperate gambit had begun, but whether it would lead to salvation or simply a different form of death remained to be seen. Their greatest test lay ahead in the zombie-infested wasteland that Atlanta had become. The massive steel gates of Fort McPherson rose like a beacon of hope against the blood-red sunset, their imposing structure promising safety after the harrowing 15-mile journey through zombie-infested Atlanta. Detective Marcus Williams could barely believe they had made it this far. Of the 4 to 7 survivors who had attempted the mall escape, only 31 remained alive to witness what appeared to be their salvation. The losses had been devastating. Captain David Morrison had sacrificed himself to save the Brooks children when their vehicle was overrun, and elderly Mr. Patterson had succumbed to a heart attack during a particularly intense zombie encounter. The military checkpoint was unlike anything the survivors had expected. Instead of battle-weary soldiers grateful for more civilians to protect, they encountered personnel in pristine uniforms who seemed oddly well prepared for their arrival. Colonel Sandra Hayes greeted them with professional efficiency, but her questions were strangely specific about their group composition, medical conditions, and most pointedly, any research or scientific discoveries they might have made during their ordeal. Dr. Emily Rodriguez immediately sensed something was wrong when the medical personnel showed excessive interest in Dr. Benjamin Carter's research materials. Carter himself was barely conscious, his concealed infections having progressed significantly during their escape journey. The base's chief medical officer, Dr. Victoria Blackwood, seemed more interested in Carter's zombie virus research than in treating his deteriorating condition, asking detailed questions about mutation rates and infection vectors. That seemed beyond normal medical curiosity. The survivors were housed in what officials called temporary quarantine facilities. Clean, comfortable barracks that felt luxurious after their mall ordeal, but were unmistakably locked from the outside. Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, with his military background, recognized the setup immediately. "These aren't guest quarters," he whispered to Marcus during their first night at the base. "We're prisoners, not refugees." Research assistant Lisa Thompson made the most disturbing discovery while being interviewed about Dr. Carter's work. The base's laboratory contained equipment and research materials that suggested they had been studying the zombie virus for months before the outbreak began. Computer terminals displayed genetic sequences that matched Carter's findings, and several researchers made casual references to Phase 2 and controlled exposure protocols. That chilled her to the bone. The truth began to emerge when communications specialist Jennifer Davis managed to access the base's internal radio frequencies. Using equipment she had smuggled in her pack, the transmission she intercepted painted a horrifying picture. Fort McPherson wasn't just a safe zone, it was a research facility where the zombie virus had been developed as a biological weapon. The outbreak hadn't been an accident. It had been a field test that had spiraled beyond their control. Dr. Carter, in his final lucid moments before the infection claimed him completely, shared a shocking revelation with Emily. His analysis of the virus had revealed markers indicating it was designed to be controllable, with specific genetic triggers that could theoretically be used to direct zombie behavior. The implications were staggering. Someone had created the outbreak with the intention of maintaining some level of control over the undead hordes. The base's true purpose became clear when Dr. Blackwood announced that certain survivors would be selected for advanced medical evaluation based on their exposure history and genetic profiles. Nurse Patricia Williams and maintenance worker Carlos Martinez, who had shown natural immunity to the virus, were immediately prioritized for testing. The clinical language couldn't disguise what everyone understood. They were going to be used as experimental subjects. Jake Thompson's police instincts kicked in when he noticed armed guards positioning themselves strategically around the barracks during mealtimes. The survivors weren't guests. They were test subjects who had conveniently delivered themselves to the laboratory. The children, Tyler and Madison Brooks, were of particular interest to the researchers because of their prolonged exposure to infected environments without showing any symptoms. The moral complexity deepened when Colonel Hayes offered the survivors a devil's bargain. Those who cooperated with the research program would be guaranteed safety and resources within the base's protected environment. Those who refused would be released back into the zombie-infested wasteland with minimal supplies. The choice seemed obvious, but Emily recognized it for what it truly was: complicity in potentially genocidal research. Teacher Amanda Foster became the unlikely voice of resistance, arguing that their survival meant nothing if they allowed themselves to become tools of the same people who had created the nightmare plaguing humanity. Her words resonated with many survivors, but the alternative, leaving the base's protection, seemed like certain death. The situation reached a breaking point when Tyler Brooks was taken for routine medical evaluation and returned hours later with needle marks on his arms and gaps in his memory. The sight of the traumatized child galvanized the survivors into action, but they faced an impossible decision: remain as unwilling participants in horrific experiments, or attempt another desperate escape into a world overrun by the very monsters their captors had created. As night fell over Fort McPherson, the survivors realized they had escaped one trap only to fall into another. The sanctuary they had desperately sought was actually the source of their nightmare, and their fight for survival was about to take on an entirely different meaning. The question was no longer whether they could survive the zombie apocalypse, but whether they could stop the people responsible for creating it. The rebellion began at midnight when Detective Marcus Williams made a decision that would define the future of humanity. Standing in the locked barracks with the remaining 28 survivors, he looked into the eyes of people who had endured unimaginable horrors only to discover that their government had orchestrated the entire nightmare. The time for passive resistance had ended. They would either die as free human beings or live as experimental subjects. In a military laboratory, the escape plan was audacious in its simplicity. Communications specialist Jennifer Davis had discovered that Fort McPherson's security systems were designed to keep zombies out, not to prevent people from leaving. the base's generators, which powered the electric fences and automated defenses, were housed in a building near the main gate. If they could disable the power grid, the ensuing chaos would provide cover for their escape while simultaneously releasing the zombie hordes that the military had been using for their twisted experiments. Research assistant Lisa Thompson had made the most crucial discovery while reviewing Dr. Carter's final notes. The zombie virus contained a genetic kill switch, a specific sequence that could theoretically be activated to destroy the pathogen in infected hosts. However, implementing this cure required access to the base's advanced laboratory equipment and the original virus samples that Dr. Victoria Blackwood's team had been using in their experiments. The plan required splitting their forces one final time. Sergeant Michael Rodriguez would lead a team to the generator facility, using his military knowledge to disable the base's power systems. Meanwhile, Dr. Emily Rodriguez and Lisa Thompson would infiltrate the laboratory to access the research data needed to create a cure. The remaining survivors, led by Jake Thompson and teacher Amanda Foster, would prepare for evacuation while protecting the children during the inevitable chaos. The operation began when naturally immune survivors, Patricia Williams and Carlos Martinez, created a diversion by triggering fire alarms throughout the residential sections of the base. As confused personnel responded to the false emergency, Rodriguez's team moved through maintenance tunnels toward the power station. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. They were using the same stealth tactics that had failed at the mall, but this time they were fighting human monsters instead of undead ones. Emily's infiltration of the laboratory revealed the full scope of the military's atrocities. Dozens of zombie specimens were contained in reinforced cells, being subjected to various experiments designed to enhance their aggression and coordination. More horrifying still were the human test subjects, survivors from other rescue operations, who had been infected deliberately to study the virus's progression. Among them, Emily recognized faces from television news reports of missing persons, people whose families had been told they died in the initial outbreak. The breakthrough came when Lisa accessed Dr. Blackwood's computer files and discovered the complete genetic sequence for the kill switch protocol. The cure wasn't theoretical, it was ready for implementation, but the military had been withholding it to continue their research into biological warfare applications. The data showed that airborne dispersal of the cure could theoretically neutralize every zombie within a 50-mile radius within 72 hours. Rodriguez's team successfully disabled the generators, just as base security discovered the laboratory infiltration. The power failure triggered immediate chaos as automated systems failed, emergency lighting activated, and most critically, the containment cells holding experimental zombies began opening. Due to security protocol failures, the base's personnel found themselves facing the same nightmare they had inflicted on the outside world. The final confrontation came when Colonel Sandra Hayes cornered Emily and Lisa in the laboratory. Demanding the return of the research data, Hayes revealed the military's ultimate plan to use the zombie virus as a weapon against enemy nations while protecting American citizens with the cure. Her twisted patriotism couldn't comprehend why the survivors would sabotage such a strategic advantage, even as zombies poured through the facility's corridors behind her. The battle for the laboratory became a three-way conflict between survivors, military personnel, and the experimental zombies now loose within the base. Jake Thompson arrived with the evacuation team just as Hayes drew her weapon on Emily, leading to a desperate firefight amid the chaos of zombie attacks and failing infrastructure. The climactic moment came when young Tyler Brooks, the boy who had been traumatized by medical experiments, made the choice to activate the cure protocol himself. His small hands worked the laboratory controls while adults fought around him, his determination to prevent other children from suffering the same fate driving him beyond his fears. The airborne cure dispersed through the base's ventilation system, just as the survivors made their final escape through the main gate. Behind them, Fort McPherson burned as zombies overran the facility, but ahead lay a transformed world. Within hours, zombies throughout Atlanta began collapsing as the genetic kill switch activated, their bodies finally finding the peace that death should have brought them originally. Marcus Williams stood with his fellow survivors on a hill overlooking the city as the sun rose on a new world. They had lost so much, friends, family, innocence, but they had also gained something precious, the knowledge that humanity's capacity for both evil and heroism knew no bounds. The zombie apocalypse was ending, but the work of rebuilding Civilization, and ensuring such horrors never happened again, was just beginning.